Welcome to Monday. Hope it's a good one for you. Let's take a minute, come on into my little world and share a thought together. Maybe a good one. Who knows? We only knew her as Grandma Barry. By the time I came along, she was seemingly an ancient little lady. My grandparents weren't young, and she was my mother's grandmother. I saw her as a typical little old lady. I see her today. Her hair done up, all gray to white, kind of braided around, pulled around, as ladies wore their hair in those days. I didn't really know her age. I just knew that she was old. I never saw her do very much outside of the little room in my grandparents' house where she spent most of her time. In that room there were beds, and there was a dresser and a rocking chair. About any time that I saw her, she was in that rocking chair. She was either cutting out squares for a quilt out of old fabric, or she was piecing those squares together. I say squares, pieces of fabric in different shapes, but mostly squares, that she would put together and make the top for a quilt. Common among ladies of that day. I don't remember her saying very much. I think we hugged her some, but I don't remember her involving herself much with us. Along the way, her health began to deteriorate, and her mental condition along with it. I don't know what the situation was. Maybe today she would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Maybe it was just her circulatory system and she was dealing with some sort of dementia. Anyway, she began to have some problems. Her health began to go down, and I understood that she had gone to the doctor more than once. I was somewhere between 5 and 10 years of age at this point. Even stopped one time, I believe, when we were there to go visit her in the hospital while she was in the hospital for a little while. But most of the time I remember sitting in that front bedroom of the house, and we would go and look at her chair and see the pieces of fabric and so forth that she had there. As her mental condition began to decline, she began to have more problems. She didn't necessarily recognize her daughter, my grandmother. She would talk to my grandfather, who was her son-in-law, and ask him who that crazy woman was that was in the house with him and why he had some other woman in the house and where was her daughter. Happens sometimes when the mental condition begins to deteriorate. Then problems arose even more. She didn't seem to be much out of that chair, but every now and then, if she was left in the room alone with nobody watching, she might close the door or have the door closed, and then she would open the window, take out the screen, and she would run away. And before anyone knew it, she was out of sight. She would often be found by a neighbor in the next block or somewhere down the street. Someone would see her and wonder who she was. She wouldn't know where she necessarily came from. But she was still my great-grandmother. We just called her Grandma Barry, B-A-R-R-Y, Grandma Barry, because that was her last name. Didn't know her by anything else. In fact, when she passed away, and I was about 9 or 10 years old, I believe I was 10 when she passed away, it was the first funeral I had ever attended. It took place in the Baptist Church in Sweetwater, Texas. My mother thought it would be good for us to go to the funeral, so my cousins and I and my sisters and I went to that funeral. I'm not sure my younger sister went, but we went to that funeral and we listened to the things that were said. I don't remember much what was said, but I do remember there was a group of people singing back in an alcove where you couldn't see them, and I was just amazed at the sound. I remember the songs that were sung, at least one of them in particular. It was a special time. Anyway, Grandma Barry was to me just a person of no real difference, no real change in life, no real effect, except that she sat in her chair and made her quilts. But you know, the other day I was thinking about it. She had a history long before I was born. Her marriage, her life, her children that she raised, the things that she did. Don't know much about them. I don't know really much about her life. As far as I know, throughout her life, she was a mother, grandmother. She was a homemaker, a person who evidently knew how to sew and taught her daughter how to sew, who became an excellent seamstress, and her granddaughter, who became an exceptional seamstress. She passed along some of the traits. In all that I can tell, she was a good mother who loved her children, took care of them, raised them well, and they became people of character, of intelligence, of ability. Now, the world wouldn't know them. You could look up their death certificates and so forth, but the world wouldn't know them much, for they were just simple people who lived their lives, worked hard, and made their way through and raised their families as well. But what I want to say to you today is a reminder that no matter how simple life may be, it has its effect. No matter how small we may seem in the scope of the world, we have an impact. Jesus looked at his times, and he talked about the people of his times. And there was something that he said that really caught my attention, especially as it's translated in the King James and New King James versions. In the 11th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus makes a simple statement. After he talked about John the Baptist came and tried to share one thing with you, I came to another, tried to share another, but you really wouldn't listen. You didn't really want to listen to either one of us. And in the end, he points out that wisdom is justified, as some translations say, deeds or results or works. But I kind of like the impact of the King James Version, because I think it carries with it a certain amount of the heart of the message. Wisdom is justified in her children, in the things that follow after. That's how you judge a person's life. As a little boy, I saw my great-grandmother as a lady who sat in a chair and made quilts and did very little else. But she was seen as a mother, a grandmother, and a person of impact, a person of influence, where it counted the most, right in her family. So as we look at the world and we look at people around us, recognize that we will see what we see, but the end results and the greater impact down the road may be far more than we've imagined. Hey, touch the lives around you and be justified in the deeds that are done. I think that's a good thought for today. Hey, glad you're with me today. Hope we can share some more things a little further down the road. Have a great Monday, and I'll see you later.